Leo traced the rim of his chipped ceramic mug, the bitter, weak coffee inside a perfect reflection of his life. It was a gray existence, lived in the faded watercolor wash of poverty and quiet desperation. His world was a small, third-floor apartment that smelled perpetually of damp plaster and boiled cabbage, a tiny kingdom he shared with the only person who mattered, his mother, Ilara. She was his sun, even though her own eyes had long ago surrendered to a permanent, milky darkness. He looked at his hands, calloused and raw from scrubbing dishes at a greasy downtown diner. They were the hands of a ghost, a young man who moved through the city unseen, unheard, a necessary but forgettable part of its machinery. He wore his invisibility like a second skin, a threadbare coat that offered little warmth but had become grimly familiar. His dreams were small, practical things: a month where the rent was not late, a new blanket for his mother's bed, a doctor's visit that did not end with a sympathetic but helpless shrug. His motivation was pure, a single, unwavering flame in the cold draft of his reality. It was for her. Everything was for Ilara. Her gentle hands, which could still find his face in the dark. Her quiet voice, which never complained, even when the pain in her joints was a sharp, insistent drum. She was a fallen queen in a forgotten kingdom of two, and he was her sole, devoted knight. This morning, however, the familiar weight of their struggle felt heavier. A crumpled eviction notice sat on the small, wobbly table like a death sentence. The landlord, a man with a face like a clenched fist, had been patient, but his patience had finally worn thin, like the soles of Leo's only pair of shoes. Desperation was no longer a visitor. It had moved in, taking up residence in the hollow space behind Leo's ribs. Ilara sat in her worn armchair by the window, her face turned towards the pale light she could only feel. She was a statue of serene sorrow. She must have sensed the storm in him, the frantic, silent screaming of a cornered animal. Her head tilted slightly. "Leo, my dear boy," she said, her voice a soft, fragile thing. "Come here." He crossed the small room and knelt by her chair, taking her cool, dry hand in his. The contrast between her delicate fingers and his rough, scarred ones was a painful summary of their lives. She had once known softness, a world he could only imagine. "There is something your father left for you," she whispered, her other hand fumbling in the pocket of her cardigan. "He told me to give it to you only when the wolves were at the door. I think I can hear them howling now." She pulled out an old, yellowed envelope. It was sealed with a wax stamp that had long ago crumbled, leaving only a faint, indecipherable impression. It felt impossibly heavy in his hand, a relic from a forgotten time, a message from a ghost. His father, Arthur, had died when Leo was just a boy, a vague memory of a warm laugh and a scratchy beard. He had been a simple watchmaker, or so Leo had always been told. "What is it?" Leo asked, his voice thick with a mixture of fear and a fragile, unfamiliar flicker of hope. "I do not know," Ilara admitted. He said it was a key, not to a treasure, but to a truth, and that the truth would be enough." With trembling fingers, Leo opened the brittle envelope. Inside was not a letter, not a word of explanation. There was only a single, ornate, strangely heavy key made of a dark, unfamiliar metal and a small, crisp piece of paper. On the paper, written in elegant, fading ink, was an address: the Blackwood Sterling Bank, 1 Financial Plaza. The name meant nothing to him, but the address was a legend. It was the heart of the city's financial district, a place of impossible wealth and power. It was a world away from his own, an alien planet of polished marble and expensive silence. What could his father, a humble watchmaker, possibly have to do with such a place? He looked from the key to his mother's sightless eyes, then back to the eviction notice on the table. The wolves were not just howling, they were scratching at the door. He had no other path, no other hope. The truth would be enough, his father had said. Leo prayed he was right. He helped his mother get ready, dressing her in her best coat, a thin wool garment that had seen better decades. He couldn't leave her alone, not today. The apartment felt like a tomb waiting to be sealed. "We're going on an adventure, Mom," he said, forcing a brightness into his tone that felt like swallowing glass. "I am always on an adventure with you, my son," she replied, her simple faith a sharp pain in his chest. The bus ride downtown was a journey between worlds. They left the gray, cracked pavement of their neighborhood and entered the gleaming canyons of the city center. Towers of glass and steel clawed at the sky, monuments to a kind of success so vast it felt obscene. The Blackwood Sterling Bank was not just a building, it was a fortress of wealth, an imposing cathedral of commerce. Its bronze doors were polished to a mirror sheen, reflecting the distorted, insignificant figures of Leo and his mother. The air inside was cool and smelled of money and old leather. It was an atmosphere designed to intimidate, to make anyone of modest means feel like a stain on a white dress. Men in perfectly tailored suits and women who dripped quiet jewelry moved with an easy, predatory grace. They glanced at Leo and his blind mother, their eyes skating over them with a disinterest more insulting than contempt. Leo felt his courage shrink. He was a mouse in a den of lions. He led his mother to a small park bench just outside the bank's imposing entrance, the polished granite cool beneath her. He couldn't bring her into that arena of judgment. "I have to go inside for a moment, Mom. I'll be right here, right where you can see me, if you could see," he said, his attempt at a joke falling flat. "I can feel you, Leo. That is all that matters," she said, squeezing his hand. "Be brave." He took a deep breath, the cold, clean air doing nothing to calm the frantic bird beating against the glass of his ribs. He clutched the strange key in his pocket, its cold weight a bizarre anchor in the overwhelming ocean of luxury. He turned and walked towards the bronze doors, pushing them open and stepping into the lion's den alone. The war had begun. The lobby of the Blackwood Sterling Bank was a symphony of hushed power. The only loud sound was the self-important boom of one man's voice, a discordant note in the otherwise perfect composition. Marcus Thorne made his entrance not like a man entering a bank, but like a king returning to his court. He was draped in a suit so black it seemed to absorb the light, a stark contrast to the garish gold watch on his wrist that flashed with every arrogant gesture. "Davies!" he bellowed, his voice echoing off the marble floors. "I don't have all day. My time is measured in thousands of dollars per second. Your bank's lethargy is costing me a fortune." A harried, balding man in a slightly less expensive suit scurried forward. "Mr. Thorne, of course. Right this way. We have everything prepared for you." Thorne was followed by a small entourage of younger men, all dressed in similar sycophantic suits. They laughed a little too loudly at his pronouncements, their faces a mixture of admiration and fear. Marcus Thorne was not just a client. He was a force of nature, a titan of industry whose cruelty was as legendary as his wealth. He treated the world as his personal plaything, and its people as ants to be either ignored or crushed under his heel for sport. Leo stood near the back of the queue, feeling smaller and more invisible than ever. He was waiting to speak to a teller, to ask someone, anyone, what this mysterious key was for. He felt a profound and urgent need to be done and gone, to rescue his mother from the bench outside and retreat to the safety of their shabby apartment. But Thorne, while waiting for the manager to unlock a private room, let his bored, predatory gaze sweep across the lobby. It was the look of a shark scanning for wounded fish. His eyes landed on Leo. He saw the worn jacket, the cheap shoes, the anxious posture, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his handsome face. It was the smile of a cat that had just spotted a particularly slow and clumsy mouse. "Well, well," Thorne said, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. "What do we have here? Did the janitorial staff get a promotion?" His followers snickered. The other patrons in the bank looked on, some with discomfort, others with the morbid curiosity of people watching a car crash in slow motion. Leo's face burned with shame. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the marble floor. He said nothing, hoping the shark would lose interest and swim on. But Thorne was bored. And a bored Marcus Thorne was a dangerous Marcus Thorne. He strolled over to Leo, circling him like a predator examining its prey. "Look at you," he mused, flicking a piece of lint off Leo's shoulder with a theatrical gesture of disgust. "You're standing in a place where a single transaction could fund a small country for a year, and you look like you just crawled out of a sewer. What could you possibly want here? Come to cash in your bottle deposit collection?" The laughter from his entourage was louder this time. Leo's fists clenched in his pockets, his knuckles white. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor. "I'm just here on some private business, sir," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. "Private business?" Thorne roared with laughter. "What private business could you have? Did you come to beg? Is that it?" He leaned in close, his cologne overpowering and sickeningly sweet. "There's no money for beggars here. Try the street." As he spoke, Thorne gestured dismissively towards the large plate glass windows that looked out onto the plaza. His eyes fell upon the solitary, frail figure of Alara, sitting patiently on the bench, her blind eyes hidden behind dark glasses. A new, more sadistic idea lit up his features. "Oh, I see," Thorne said, his voice taking on a tone of mock discovery. "You've brought your accomplice. Is that your mother out there? The old blind woman on the bench. A classic tactic. You handle the inside job while she works the sympathy angle outside. A real family enterprise." Something inside Leo snapped. The shame, the fear, the years of quiet endurance. It all fractured under the weight of this final, unbearable insult. He looked up, and for the first time, his eyes met Marcus Thorne's. The meekness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard fire. Thorne was taken aback for a second by the sudden intensity in the boy's gaze, but it only amused him further. He had found a nerve. Now it was time to press it until it broke. "You know what?" Thorne announced to the captivated lobby. "I'm feeling generous. I'll make you a bet, sewer boy." He pointed a manicured finger at Leo. "I bet you that your entire net worth, combined with that of the beggar on the bench, doesn't even equal the cost of the polish on my shoes." He paused for dramatic effect, a showman playing to his crowd. "Let's make it interesting. Go on. Do your private business. If you can prove to me, right here, right now, that you or that woman are worth more than $1,000. A pittance, really? I'll give you $1,000,000. Cash. A collective gasp went through the lobby. It was an absurd, impossible offer, born of pure, unadulterated hubris. Thorne's smile was a gash of sadistic power. "But if you can't," he continued, his voice dropping to a menacing purr, "you will get on your knees, right here, and you will kiss my shoes. And you will admit, for all to hear, that you and your mother are nothing but worthless scum. Do we have a deal?" The silence in the bank was absolute. Every eye was on Leo. It was a public execution, a ritual humiliation for the entertainment of the rich. Thorne expected him to crumble, to run away in tears. He expected to win. He always won. But he had misjudged his opponent. He had mistaken desperation for weakness. He had insulted the one thing that gave Leo's life meaning. The fear was gone. The humiliation was gone. All that remained was a core of diamond-hard resolve. "I accept your bet," Leo said. His voice was no longer a whisper. It was clear, steady, and dangerously calm. The laughter froze on Marcus Thorne's lips. The game had just changed. A tense, electric silence descended upon the bank lobby. The air, once filled with the arrogant boom of Marcus Thorne's voice and the sycophantic laughter of his followers, was now thick with anticipation. Every person present, from the bored tellers to the wealthy patrons, was now part of an unwilling audience to a drama they didn't understand. They expected a swift, brutal conclusion, the boys' utter humiliation. Leo ignored them all. He ignored the smug, cruel smirk that had returned to Thorne's face. He ignored the whispers and the stares. He walked away from Thorne and straight towards the desk of the bank manager, Mr. Davies, who looked profoundly uncomfortable with the entire spectacle. "Excuse me," Leo said, his voice still holding that unnerving calm. Mr. Davies looked up, his expression a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Young man, this is highly irregular. I must ask you to." Leo didn't let him finish. He placed the heavy, dark metal key on the polished surface of the desk. The sound it made was a dull, definitive thud, a sound that seemed to cut through the expensive silence. "My father was Arthur Vance," Leo stated simply. "He told my mother this key was for an account here." Mr. Davies stared at the key. His professional mask of mild irritation flickered. He picked it up, his brow furrowed in concentration. The key was of a design he had never seen, yet it felt strangely familiar, like a half-remembered dream. He looked from the key to the poor, determined boy in front of him. It was absurd. Arthur Vance was a name from history, a ghost in the bank's archives, a legendary figure who had supposedly lost everything decades ago. "That's impossible," Davies stammered, more to himself than to Leo. "Check it," Leo insisted, his gaze unwavering. From across the lobby, Marcus Thorne let out a short, barking laugh. "Arthur Vance? That failure? He died penniless. This is more pathetic than I could have imagined." The name seemed to agitate Thorne, adding a new layer of venom to his mockery. But his laughter died in his throat as he watched Mr. Davies. The bank manager, against his better judgment, had taken the key and walked towards a discreet, unmarked door behind the main teller line. His movements were hesitant, as if acting against his will, compelled by a sliver of professional duty or perhaps a flicker of pure curiosity. The crowd watched, holding its breath. Thorne leaned against a marble column, crossing his arms, the very picture of arrogant confidence. He was enjoying this, savoring the slow, delicious burn of the boy's inevitable failure. Mr. Davies disappeared into the back room. The silence stretched, becoming taut and heavy. 1 minute passed, then 2. Thorne began to tap his foot impatiently. "What's taking so long? Can't find an account with a zero balance?" he called out. Then the door opened. Mr. Davies emerged, but he was a changed man. His face, which had been ruddy and flustered, was now as white as a sheet. His hands were trembling. He walked not like a man in control, but like a man who had just seen a ghost. He approached Leo, his eyes wide, with a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He leaned in close, his voice a choked, horrified whisper that only Leo could hear. "The key. It opens the Vance Legacy Trust. A dormant account. We thought it was a myth. An old bank legend." Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. "What's in it?" Mr. Davies swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He couldn't seem to form the words. He simply shook his head and gestured for Leo to follow him into the private viewing room. As Leo walked past, the eyes of the crowd followed him, their expressions shifting from scorn to confusion. Thorne, his curiosity now piqued by the manager's bizarre behavior, pushed himself off the column and strode towards the room. "What is this nonsense? I want to see this for myself," he demanded, barging in behind them. The room was small, soundproof, and contained little more than a secure terminal and a screen. Mr. Davies's hands shook as he logged in, using a series of complex passwords before finally inserting the key into a special port on the console. There was a soft chime, and the screen flickered to life. On the screen, in stark, simple digital numbers, was a balance. It was a number so long it seemed fictional. Not thousands, not millions, hundreds of millions. But that wasn't the shocking part. Below the liquid assets was a portfolio summary. It listed controlling interests in dozens of corporations, and at the very top of that list was a majority shareholding in Thorne Consolidated Holdings. The air in the small room was sucked out in a sudden violent vacuum. Leo stared, his mind refusing to process the information. It was impossible. It was a dream. But the reaction of the man next to him was all too real. Marcus Thorne had been peering over their shoulders, a contemptuous sneer on his face. As the portfolio list appeared, his sneer vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed incomprehension. His eyes darted from the screen to Leo, then back to the screen. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty gray mask of terror. The laughter that had been bubbling in his chest, ready to erupt at the boy's failure, died instantly. It was as if a switch had been flipped, freezing him from the inside out. His arrogant posture collapsed. His hands, which had been confidently on his hips, fell limply to his sides. He was paralyzed, a statue of hubris struck by lightning. The name on the account was clearly visible. Ilara Vance, the beggar on the bench. From the lobby, the curious onlookers could not see the screen, but they could see the faces. They saw the bank manager's ghost-white shock. They saw the poor boy's stunned disbelief. And most importantly, they saw the great Marcus Thorne, the titan of industry, the king of the city, stumble backward a step, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. The smugness, the cruelty, the power, it all evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a hollow, terrified shell. The absolute silence that followed was more damning than any accusation. It was the sound of a world turning upside down, the sound of a god falling from his pedestal. The laughter had died. And in its place, a terrible, beautiful, and devastating truth was being born. Mr. Davies, the bank manager, was the first to recover, though his voice was still a fragile, reedy thing. He looked at Leo. not as a piece of street trash who had wandered into his bank, but as one would look at a prince who had just revealed his crown. The pity in his eyes had been replaced by a profound, trembling awe. "Mr. Vance," he began, the name feeling foreign and yet perfectly right on his tongue. It seems, it seems your mother is the majority owner of this institution, and of Mr. Thorne's entire enterprise." This last part was said with a pointed, almost fearful glance at the frozen figure of Marcus Thorne. The information didn't just change the dynamic in the room, it shattered it. Leo was no longer a beggar in a palace. He was the owner of the palace. The bank, the marble floors, the tailored suits, it all belonged to his mother. To the gentle, blind woman sitting on a park bench outside. Leo's mind was a whirlwind. He thought of the eviction notice, the cheap coffee, the worn-out shoes. It all seemed like a scene from someone else's life, a sad story he had read long ago. He looked at the screen, at the impossible number, at the name Thorne Consolidated Holdings. His father, the humble watchmaker, had built this in secret. Why? As if reading his thoughts, Mr. Davies, now acting as a guide rather than a gatekeeper, tapped a few more keys on the terminal. A new file appeared on the screen, labeled Genesis. "According to the founding documents," Davies explained, his voice gaining a little strength, "the Vance Legacy Trust was established by Arthur Vance over 30 years ago. He and a young Marcus Thorne were business partners." Thorne flinched as if he'd been struck. The paralysis was breaking, replaced by a rising, desperate fury. "That's a lie. He was nothing. I built my company from the ground up, with my own two hands." "The record state otherwise," Davies said, his new loyalty to the account holder making him bold. "They state that the original company, Vance and Thorne Innovations, was built on Arthur Vance's patents, and that you, Mr. Thorne, orchestrated a hostile takeover, forged documents, and pushed your partner out, leaving him bankrupt and ruined." The story fell into place with the sickening click of a puzzle piece. This was the great betrayal. This was the source of his family's quiet, enduring poverty. The reason his father had died young, his spirit broken. The reason his mother had lost her sight, the doctors had once said, from a period of extreme, prolonged stress. It was all because of this man, the man who had just mocked his mother for being a beggar on the street. A cold, righteous anger, pure and clean as ice, flowed through Leo's veins. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It was about justice. A justice 30 years in the making. "My father didn't stay ruined, did he?" Leo asked, his voice low and dangerous. "No," Davies said, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the unfolding saga. "He rebuilt. In secret, he used a different name, invested brilliantly, and bought back what was stolen from him, piece by piece. He bought the debt of your suppliers, Mr. Thorne. He bought the land your factories are built on. He acquired shares in your company through 100 different shell corporations. He built a cage around you, and you never even saw the bars." Suddenly, a sharp, authoritative voice cut through the tension. "That is quite enough, Mr. Davies. Some matters are not for public display." An elderly man had appeared in the doorway of the small room. He was tall and impeccably dressed, in an old-fashioned but perfectly maintained tweed suit. He had a kind, deeply lined face, and eyes that held a calm, intelligent light. He looked at Leo with a sad, knowing smile. "You must be Leo," the man said. You have your father's eyes. My name is Alistair Finch. I was your father's lawyer and the executor of his trust. This was the wise mentor, the keeper of the final secrets. He had been alerted the moment the Vance key was used. Finch stepped into the room, his presence immediately commanding a level of respect that Thorne's blustering never could. Arthur knew this day would come, Finch said, his gaze shifting to Thorne, who was now cornered, his face a mask of sweating, panicked rage. He knew you would not have changed, Marcus. Your arrogance was always your greatest weakness. He built this fortune not for revenge, but for accountability. Thorne finally found his voice, a venomous, sputtering hiss. This is insane. It's a fraud. I'll have you all arrested. I'll sue this bank into oblivion. I'll destroy you. He pulled out his phone, his fingers stabbing at the screen. He was calling his lawyers, his fixers, his cronies. The cornered animal was preparing to bite. He was trying to bribe, to threaten, to intimidate his way out of the truth. He barked orders into the phone, his voice a frantic, ugly rasp. He was trying to freeze the Vance account, to have Alara declared incompetent, to spin a story to the press. Finch watched him with a look of profound pity. It's too late for that, Marcus. He turned back to Leo. Your father built more than a fortune. He built an army, a silent army of the grateful. People you crushed, Marcus, whom Arthur quietly saved. They have been waiting. They have documents. They have testimony. They have been waiting for this exact moment. Alistair Finch placed a gentle hand on Leo's shoulder. Your father's plan is in motion, but the final choice rests with you, Leo. This power is now yours. The question is, what will you do with it? The weight of that question, of a 30-year quest for justice, settled onto Leo's young shoulders. Outside, the world was oblivious. But in this small, soundproof room, a war for a legacy was about to reach its final, explosive battle. The emergency board meeting of Thorne Consolidated Holdings was convened in a room that reeked of old power and fresh fear. It was a cavernous space, dominated by a long, polished mahogany table that reflected the grim faces of the board members like a dark, distorted mirror. These were men and women who had ridden the wave of Marcus Thorne's success for years, enjoying the spoils of his ruthless corporate warfare without ever having to get their own hands dirty. Now, they were being asked to choose a side, and their discomfort was palpable. Marcus Thorne sat at the head of the table, a position he had occupied for decades with unshakable authority. Today, however, he looked less like a king on his throne and more like a deposed tyrant making his last stand. His suit was still immaculate, but his face was drawn and pale, his eyes darting about with a paranoid energy. His lawyers flanked him, whispering urgently, shuffling stacks of paper that felt more like props than actual evidence. On the other side of the table sat Leo. He was not alone. Alistair Finch was by his side, a calm, reassuring presence. And next to him, in a simple but elegant wheelchair provided by the bank, was Alara. She had insisted on being there. Though her eyes could not see the drama, she could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the culmination of a lifetime of quiet suffering. Her presence was a silent, powerful testament to the human cost of Thorne's ambition. She wore a simple dark dress, her face serene, a portrait of dignity that made Thorne's expensive suit look like a cheap costume. The air in the boardroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. The media had been held at bay, their cameras and microphones forming a frenzied pack in the lobby downstairs. but their presence was felt, a ticking clock counting down to the moment the story would break. Thorne, ever the showman, decided to launch the first attack. He stood, forcing a semblance of his old commanding swagger. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," he began, his voice a strained imitation of its usual confident boom. "We are here today because of a preposterous, fraudulent claim made by this boy." He gestured dismissively at Leo. "He and his handlers are attempting a brazen corporate raid based on forged documents and a fantasy from 30 years ago." He launched into his final gambit. His lawyers presented a thick binder of documents, claiming to prove that Arthur Vance had defaulted on his original partnership shares, legally and irrevocably signing them over to Thorne. They produced loan agreements, default notices, and a final transfer deed, all seemingly notarized and legitimate. It was a carefully constructed fortress of lies, designed to be impenetrable. "The evidence is clear," Thorne concluded, a triumphant, ugly smirk returning to his face. "The Vance family has no claim, not to a single share. This is nothing more than a pathetic shakedown. I move that we dismiss this absurd claim, and I will be pursuing criminal charges for fraud and corporate espionage against all involved." He sat down, confident he had won. The legal loophole was perfect. The documents were flawless forgeries, but they would take months, if not years, to disprove in court. By then, he would have crushed Leo and his phantom army. He looked at Leo, his eyes gleaming with sadistic pleasure. Checkmate. A nervous murmur went through the board members. The documents looked official. Thorne's argument was compelling. They were businessmen, and they understood the brutal logic of contracts and defaults. They began to look at Leo and his mother with renewed suspicion. Leo felt a flicker of fear. The paper fortress looked so real, so convincing. He felt Ilara's hand find his under the table, her gentle squeeze a silent message of support. He looked at Alistair Finch, who gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. The time had come. Leo stood up. He was just a boy, in a borrowed suit, facing a giant of the corporate world. But he was not the same boy who had trembled in the bank lobby. He was the son of Arthur Vance. "Mr. Thorne is right about one thing," Leo began, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the tension. "This is about a fantasy. His fantasy. The fantasy that his success was built on his own genius and not on the back of a man he betrayed." He did not raise his voice. He did not present counter-arguments. He did not try to fight Thorne on his own swampy legal ground. He simply spoke the truth. "He talks about documents, about paper. My father taught me that a person's legacy isn't written on paper. It's written in the lives they touch." He paused, and then looked towards the boardroom door. "I have some people who would like to speak. Their legacies are also not written on paper." On cue, the large double doors of the boardroom opened. The first to enter was a grizzled older man with the rough hands of a factory worker. His name was George Peterson. His family had owned a small steel fabrication plant for 3 generations. "Marcus Thorne tried to bankrupt me 10 years ago," Peterson said, his voice a low rumble of righteous anger. He placed a thin folder on the table. "He used a shell company to buy up my supply chain and drive my costs through the roof. I was a week from closing my doors, putting 200 people out of work. I was ruined." He pointed a trembling finger at Thorne. "Then I got an anonymous wire transfer, enough to pay off my debts and buy out the supplier. I never knew who it came from. Until yesterday. He looked at Leo. It came from the Vance Trust. Arthur Vance saved my company. This folder contains the forensic accounting trail that links Thorne's personal accounts directly to the shell company that tried to destroy me. Before the board could fully process this, another figure entered. An elegant, elderly woman in her 70s, leaning on a cane. She was an inventor named Helena Reed. In 1995, my late husband developed a revolutionary new alloy, she said, her voice trembling with long-suppressed grief. Marcus Thorne was his junior research partner. He stole the patent, filed it under his own name, and claimed my husband was merely a lab assistant. The stress of the betrayal, the legal battles we could not afford, it led to his heart attack. She placed a small, worn leather-bound journal on the table. This is my husband's original research diary, dated and witnessed, the foundation of Thorne Consolidated's initial success. One by one, the silent army came forward. A former employee with records of Thorne's illegal dumping of industrial waste, an act for which a junior manager was framed and imprisoned. A small business owner with proof that Thorne had engaged in racketeering. Each story was a nail, and Thorne's coffin was being built right there on the mahogany table. The final witness was Mr. Davies, the bank manager. He walked in holding a single, slim USB drive. Mr. Thorne's lawyers submitted these documents to us this morning, Davies announced, gesturing to the thick binder Thorne's team had presented. As per standard protocol for a transaction of this magnitude, our forensic department analyzed them. The digital metadata embedded in the notarization stamps shows they were all created less than 24 hours ago, on a computer registered to Thorne's personal legal firm. He slid the USB drive into a port on the table. This drive contains the original documents from 30 years ago, the real ones. They were held in stasis in the Vance Trust. They show that Arthur Vance never defaulted. In fact, he paid off the partnership's initial loans himself. This, he held up Thorne's forged deed, is a complete and utter fabrication. The boardroom was utterly silent. The paper fortress had crumbled into dust. The board members stared at Thorne, their faces a mixture of disgust and horror. They were not just looking at a liar. They were looking at a criminal. The man who had made them rich was a fraud, a thief, and a monster. The chairman of the board, a man who had known Thorne for 20 years, cleared his throat. His voice was heavy with finality. A motion is on the floor to dismiss the Vance claim. All in favor? Not a single hand was raised. All opposed? Every hand on the board, except for Thorne's, went up. The motion is defeated, the chairman declared. A new motion is on the floor. To remove Marcus Thorne from his position as CEO and chairman of the board, effective immediately, and to hand over all evidence presented here today to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. All in favor? Every hand went up. Unanimous. The downfall was swift, total, and brutal. Marcus Thorne let out a strangled, inhuman roar of fury and disbelief. Fools! You are all fools. I made you. This company is nothing without me. He lunged across the table, his face contorted into a mask of pure hatred, his hands reaching for Leo. But security guards, who had been waiting discreetly outside, rushed in. They grabbed Thorne by the arms, his expensive suit wrinkling in their firm grasp. He was dragged from the room, still screaming, still threatening, a king being pulled from his castle, his crown rolling in the dust. As he was hauled through the lobby, The flashbulbs of the waiting media erupted, capturing his final, humiliating moments of power. He was no longer a titan. He was just a story, a headline, a disgrace. Back in the silent boardroom, Leo sank into his chair, the adrenaline draining out of him, leaving a profound exhaustion in its wake. He looked at his mother. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, a river of 30 years of pain finally finding its way to the sea. He took her hand. It was over. The ghost of his father could finally rest. The storm had passed. In the quiet aftermath, the world felt both strange and new. Leo sat with his mother in a sunlit suite at a hotel he now technically owned. The city sprawled out beneath them, a silent, glittering map of a life that was no longer theirs. The eviction notice, the cold apartment, the greasy diner, they were all artifacts from a buried past. Leo had expected to feel triumphant, ecstatic. Instead, he felt a deep, hollow ache. The victory was real, but so was the wound that had made it necessary. He watched his mother as she sat by the window, her hands resting in her lap. She was as serene as ever, but a weight had lifted from her shoulders that he hadn't even realized was there. The permanent line of tension around her mouth had softened. "He's gone, isn't he?" she asked softly, her voice carrying across the quiet room. The anger, the fear, I can't feel it anymore. Leo went to her, kneeling by her side, just as he had done in their tiny apartment what felt like a lifetime ago. "It's over, Mom. It's all over. Father's work is done. You're safe." For the first time in as long as he could remember, he saw his mother weep. Not silent, sorrowful tears, but a flood of cathartic release. She pulled him close, her frail body shaking with sobs that carried 30 years of grief, injustice, and quiet endurance. Leo held her, his own tears finally falling, mourning the father he barely knew and the life that had been stolen from them. They cried together, washing away the past in a shared flood of sorrow and relief. When the tears subsided, a profound peace settled in the room. The wounds were not gone, but they could finally begin to heal. The next morning, Alistair Finch arrived, not with legal documents, but with a small, worn leather box. He placed it in Leo's hands. "Your father left one last thing for you," he said, "to be opened only after the battle was won." Leo opened the box. Inside was not another key or a financial statement. It was a simple, silver pocket watch, its gears still ticking softly, and beneath it lay a single, folded letter, written in his father's elegant hand. He unfolded the paper and began to read aloud to his mother. "My dearest Leo," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then my long work is complete, and a great injustice has been set right. But I did not build this fortune for the sake of vengeance. Vengeance is a poison that rots the soul of the one who wields it. I did it for the sake of balance." Leo's voice grew thick with emotion as he continued. "I have left you with a great and terrible power, my son. Wealth is not a treasure to be hoarded, but a tool to be wielded. It can build hospitals, or it can build walls. It can fund dreams, or it can finance nightmares. Its only true value is in the good it can create, in the suffering it can ease, in the dignity it can restore." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "Do not let this money change the core of who you are. I have watched you, through Alistair's eyes, as you have grown. I have seen your kindness, your quiet strength, your devotion to your mother. These are the true inheritance I leave you. The money is merely soil. Your character is the seed. What you choose to grow is your legacy. The letter ended with a final, heart-wrenching message. I am sorry I could not be there to watch you become the man you are. But know that in every act of kindness you perform, in every life you better, my spirit will be there with you. Be good, my son. That is all I have ever asked. Your loving father, Arthur. The letter was a final gift, a moral compass to navigate the strange new ocean of wealth he now found himself in. It clarified everything. It solidified the resolve that had been forged in the fire of the confrontation with Thorne. Leo knew what he had to do. His first act as the steward of the Vance legacy was not to buy a mansion or a sports car. He made a phone call. He arranged for the finest team of ophthalmic surgeons in the country to consult on his mother's case. There was no guarantee, they said, but there were new experimental treatments. For the first time, there was a glimmer of hope that her world might not be dark forever. His second act was a visit. He went to the factory owned by George Peterson, the first of the Silent Army to testify. The company was still struggling, walking a tightrope of debt and uncertainty. Leo, through the newly restructured Vance Foundation, didn't just offer a loan. He invested. He funded a complete modernization of the factory, securing the jobs of all 200 employees and creating plans for expansion. He stood with George on the factory floor, the air thick with the smell of hot metal and honest labor. George, a man not given to emotion, had tears in his eyes. Your father saved me once, he said, his voice rough, and now you've saved us all again. You're a good man, Leo Vance, just like him. Leo simply nodded, the praise both warming him and filling him with a profound sense of responsibility. He looked at the faces of the workers, faces etched with relief and gratitude. This was what his father meant. This was the true meaning of wealth. It wasn't a number on a screen. It was this. It was the sound of machinery humming back to life. It was the dignity of a job secured. It was a community given a future. He had won the war. Now, the real work, the work of building a legacy of kindness, had just begun. 10 years later, the name Leo Vance was not one that appeared in gossip columns or on the covers of flashy business magazines. He was not a fixture of the billionaire party circuit. He was a quiet presence in the city, a name associated with progress and compassion. The Vance Foundation had become a powerful force for good. Its influence felt in the free clinics that served the city's poorest neighborhoods, the scholarships that sent bright kids from forgotten districts to the country's best universities, and the green parks that had blossomed in the concrete husks of abandoned industrial zones. Leo himself had changed very little. He still preferred simple suits to designer labels, and his office, while spacious, was modest and functional. The greatest luxury he allowed himself was time to spend with his mother. The experimental treatments had been a miracle. Ilara's vision had not been fully restored, but the milky darkness had receded into a world of soft shapes and gentle colors. She could see the smile on her son's face, the green of the trees in the park, the warmth of the sun. It was more than enough. Today, they were at the dedication of the new pediatric wing of the city hospital, funded entirely by the foundation. Leo stood at the podium, not as a magnate, but as a grateful citizen. He spoke of community, of shared responsibility, of the simple, profound power of kindness. His mother sat in the front row, her face a portrait of serene pride, her hand resting on Alistair Finch's arm. The old lawyer was retired now, but he never missed a Vance Foundation event. After the ceremony, as Leo was walking with his mother through a park his foundation had renovated, replacing cracked asphalt with lush grass and a playground, he saw something that made him stop. A young boy, no older than 10, was sitting on a bench, a cardboard box in front of him. In the box were a dozen small, clumsily carved wooden birds. He was trying to sell them to passers-by, his face a mask of desperate hope and heartbreaking anxiety. He looked tired. His clothes were clean but frayed, and his eyes held a familiar hunted look. It was like looking into a mirror that reflected the past. Leo felt a pang in his chest, a deep, resonant echo of a life he had almost forgotten. He walked over to the boy, his mother on his arm. "Those are beautiful birds," Leo said gently. The boy looked up, startled. "Thank you, sir. I made them myself. They're $5 each. It's for my mom. She's sick." The words hit Leo with the force of a physical blow. He looked at Alara, whose own face was filled with a deep, knowing compassion. "How much for all of them?" Leo asked. The boy's eyes went wide. "All of them? That would be $60, sir." He said it as if it were an impossibly large sum, a king's ransom. Leo reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He didn't take out $60. He took out all the cash he had, a thick stack of $100 bills amounting to several thousand. He pressed the money into the boy's small, calloused hand. The boy stared at the money, then back at Leo, his mouth agape. But this is too much. I can't." "Yes, you can," Leo said, his voice soft. He then handed the boy a business card. "My name is Leo Vance. This is the card for my foundation. I want you to have your father or a guardian call me. We're going to take care of your mother's medical bills, and we're going to give you a full scholarship for your education all the way through university." Tears welled up in the boy's eyes. He couldn't speak. He just stared at the man in front of him, as if he were an angel. Finally, he found his voice, a small, choked whisper. "Why? Why are you doing this for me?" Leo knelt down, so he was at eye level with the boy. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes, because a long time ago, Leo said, his voice thick with emotion, "My mother was sick, and I was a desperate boy trying to sell what little I had. And on my darkest day, a secret left by my father gave me a chance. It's my turn to pay it forward." He stood up and took his mother's arm, leaving the stunned, weeping boy on the bench. His life irrevocably changed. As they walked away, Ilara leaned her head on her son's shoulder. "Your father would be so proud of you, Leo." "I hope so," Leo said quietly. A question, unbidden, surfaced in his mind. He hadn't thought of him in years. "Alistair," he later asked his old friend, "whatever happened to Marcus Thorne?" Finch sighed. "A sad story. He served 7 years in prison for fraud. When he was released, he had nothing. No money, no friends, no family. He was a ghost, haunting the city he once ruled. Out of a sense of, I don't know, mercy. Perhaps you, through the foundation, anonymously offered him a job, a groundskeeper at this very park, a chance at a quiet, dignified life." "Did he take it?" Leo asked. "No," Alistair said, shaking his head. His pride was the one thing he had left. He was too proud to accept charity from the family he had tried to destroy. He refused. He was seen for a few months after that, a broken man shuffling through the streets. And then he simply vanished, faded into the obscurity he so richly deserved. Leo thought of the two paths, one built on greed, leading to a spectacular rise and an even more spectacular fall into nothingness. The other, built on a bedrock of integrity and kindness, leading to a quiet, enduring legacy. His father had planted a single seed of justice all those years ago. In his son's hands, the harvest would be eternal.